Hi everyone, this is Krista and welcome to the Feminine Takeoff. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Krista and here we talk about femininity, self-improvement, how to cultivate your relationships with yourself, your loved ones, and also platonic and non-platonic relationships. This is not a teaching channel. It's more so of a channel that is a platform for feminine women, starting with me, to discuss and talk about the things that work for us in enhancing our femininity. So as you all know, I am traveling for work. So I decided to make this video while I'm sitting in my hotel in the city that I am. And my travel ritual is every time I am traveling for work, I always order fresh flowers. And so I just order my fresh flowers and I'm going to cut them up and put them inside of a little cup. You know, it doesn't always have to be fancy, but it just, anything that adds a touch of femininity to my life is something that just makes me feel happy, feminine, and just at peace. So again, it's not fancy, so I even have it in a little in a little clear plastic cup, but it doesn't matter. I'm happy with it. Actually, let me go get some water for my flowers. I'll be right back. So now that I have some water for my fresh flowers, let's begin the topic of this video. So the topic of this video is going to be actually on femininity and self-control, or femininity and abstinence. You know, a lot of times when we talk about abstinence, we talk about abstinence as abstaining from physical intimacy or pleasures, right? But the true meaning of abstaining is not only relating to intimacy, but it has to do with refraining from indulging in something for either a greater purpose or because you know that it is not good for you. So I wrote some points down here that I would like to share with us. So with the points that I've wrote here, again, the topic of the video is femininity as it relates to self-control and femininity as it relates to abstinence, from abstaining for something that you might not think it's good for you, or you might not think it's good for you if it's not done in the proper way, in a way that has proper safety measures that are already established. So let's begin. So overall, being feminine, right? A lot of times when we think about being feminine, we think of some like pink nails, cute outfits, bows, and things like that, right? But I like to think, this might be an unpopular opinion actually, but I like to think that there is a difference between being girly and being feminine. Here's why. I think that when you are girly, that means that you like feminine things, right? You like pink things, you like girly things, and so on and forth. But I think femininity requires maturity. It is nearly impossible to be feminine without some kind of maturity and sense of yourself. And I would also like to add on, being girl, when you think of the word girly, you think of a girl, right? A young person. And so girls don't necessarily require maturity. Why is that? Because someone is taking care of them, whether it is a parent or a guardian or so on and forth. So when you think of a girl, you think a parent is taking care of them, or their guardian, a teacher, or somehow to take care of them. So they might not require maturity to its fullest extent because someone is there to take on that role of protection, of guidance, and so on and forth for that young girly girl. So a girl might not require maturity because someone is in charge, an adult or a more mature person is in charge of giving you counsel, guidance, protection, and so on and forth, right? So But when you think of a feminine woman who does require, when I think of a feminine woman, I think of someone who requires maturity. Why? Because you no longer have, or you are no longer in the umbrella of someone taking care of everything for you. You now have to have the wisdom and the maturity to fully take care of yourself, to guide yourself, to counsel yourself, or to surround yourself with people who can guide and counsel you when you are falling short. Yet, femininity is who you are when you are in charge of guiding, protecting, and leading yourself. So the next points that I'm going to talk about in this video as it relates to self-care and femininity, or self-control and femininity, is actually gonna be regarding self-maturity, self-care, and self-guidance. And all of that encompass being mature. You cannot do any of those things, self-care, self-guide, without some sort of maturity, right? So when I was younger and girly, some of these points were things that I used in order to prepare myself for self-guardianship and maturity. Or some of these points are also points that I wish someone would have taught me to prepare me for womanhood and femininity in order for me to thrive truly as a feminine woman. So let's begin, and I would like to share them with you, if I may. So point number one here is have boundaries. I've always spoken about boundaries in almost all of my videos, or if not a big majority of them. So I've always said that boundaries are the pillars for sanity. And I'll tell you why. Without boundaries, people would use you, pull you, push you into what their idea of what they want you to do is. And because it's coming from different ways, different people pulling you, you will literally be left unsane because you're being pulled in different directions, sometimes even by people who don't even know what they're doing, or even worse, where they're pulling you, where the end result of you is gonna be. Okay, so again, I said boundaries are pillared for sanity. Think of when you were a young person, right? A young girl. And you had some sort of guardianship or parents with you, okay? And let's say that your parents allowed you to date, maybe after 15 or as a teenager, however. If your parents either allowed you to date or didn't allow you to date, one or two scenarios happen. Your parents either allowed you to date, but you had boundaries, so you had to come home at a certain time, or you had to make sure your grades were correct while you were dating, or you had to make sure that you were back home by your curfew time. Let's say 9 p.m. is your curfew time, so you had to be back home by 9 p.m. Otherwise, no more dating. And so those are the boundaries if you were allowed to date. If you were not allowed to date, then that is also a boundary, because maybe your parents didn't think that it was good, conducive, or safe for you to date as a young girl. And that is a way to either protect you or to guide you into a better lifestyle as you grow older, right? Forgive me, I love playing with flowers. I really enjoy, just having fresh flowers in my room. So back to the topic. So again, we talked about just now how when you were younger, your parents either let you date, but you had boundaries on the things you could do while you were dating, or your parents didn't let you date, and that itself is simply also a boundary, right? As an adult or a feminine woman, who is actually in charge of sovereignty over you? Who is in charge of having boundaries over you to keep you safe if you're dating, or to keep you safe by not dating, right? So who has that governance or even sovereignty over you? That person should be yourself. Please excuse me, it's so cold here and my throat is so dry. So back to the point I was saying, as an adult or feminine woman now, you're no longer a girl or girly. You are now maturing or have matured into a feminine being who is now in charge of governing you, protecting you, having boundaries for you, and to keep you safe and thriving as a feminine woman. That person should be you. Okay, so because that person in you, back to the early points that I was saying earlier in boundaries, when you were allowed to date by your parents, you had boundaries, right? Or when you weren't allowed to date, that also is a boundary. When you broke those boundaries, there were usually consequences, right? So let's say they're like your parents or your guardians, whoever was looking out for you, allowed you to date. And let's say that they said, well, okay, you can go to the movies and hold hands or whatever with this person you're dating, but you have to be back home by 9 p.m. If you broke those boundaries, they have natural consequences. You're either not allowed to see the person anymore, not allowed to date anymore, not allowed to have certain privileges anymore, and so on and forth, right? So as a feminine woman, as an adult, breaking your boundaries also have consequences. The only thing is that I would even say, as an adult, as a full feminine woman, breaking your boundaries actually have a more dire consequence. They have a bigger consequence, because bigger is at stake. You're an adult now. So let's say that you say, as I'm dating, no one is allowed in my home as a feminine woman. Well, if you break those boundaries, that person who you allow in your home, who you do not know fully, might take advantage of you, might hurt you, or worse, right? So let's also always remembering that boundaries and not upkeeping your boundaries have natural consequences that can be very big. Okay, so I also wrote here, as an adult, as a full feminine woman, who is to blame when you disregard your boundaries and something unfavorable happens? Well, that person is also you, unfortunately. Because why? Only you have full sovereignty over yourself. Now, of course, there are some gray areas, right? So for example, if someone commits a crime on you, someone does something bad to you, then that's not your fault, right? So of course you should see how you've played a part in it, just to protect yourself in the future. But of course that person is bad and should be punished for whatever they did or do, right? But overall, who has full sovereignty of you as a full adult or as a feminine woman who is no longer girly? Well, that person is you. Only you have full sovereignty over yourself, you see. So I also wrote some examples here. I wrote, for example, if you decide to not have better spending habits, let's say that you continuously choose to buy the shoes first instead of paying your bills or your rent or so on and forth, what happens? Your financial boundaries that you decide to break have the consequences of either your car getting repossession, bad credit, eviction notices, and so on and forth. So as an adult, as a full feminine woman, your actions, your boundaries will always have consequences if they are not fully taken into account. Why? Again, because you have full sovereignty over yourself, you see. Or another example is, let's say that you give your time, energy, life source energy, even your body to someone who's not providing for you, who has not made any commitment to you, who has not looked out for you in any way. One of the worst things that can happen is that you now may become a single mother, a single parent, because you haven't stay stern on your boundaries of being feminine. Being feminine is such a delightful thing, but when you allow people to just tap into you, touch that delightful thing without any discernment, without any wisdom around it, now you're just letting flies touch your prizeful thing, your femininity. It's almost like having a really expensive car, like having a Rolls Royce, for example. You all know Rolls Royces are my favorite car. It's my dream car. I want it someday. I will have it someday. But it's almost like having a Rolls Royce. And what happens when you go see a Rolls Royce in a showrooms, for those of you who have, or even at a car show, when you see a Rolls Royce, chances are you will never see a Rolls Royce that is not being guarded, ever. You'll either, unless it's like in the street, parked in the street or something, you know, on a rare occurrence. You don't even normally see them in the street, but if you do, there's valet, there's security. It's usually safe, or it's parked somewhere that, you know, it's safe enough, right? But if you see a Rolls Royce that hasn't been sold before, when you see it at a car show, there are usually stanchions around it. There's usually security. There's usually a hostess that says, do you have an appointment to come see this Rolls Royce? Or if you see it at a showroom, you get invited to come to this showroom. You select the time. They already read information about you before you showed up, okay? So that's it. So imagine now that you are this Rolls Royce, and instead of having these boundaries to first guarantee self-elevation and protect the assets of the Rolls Royce, the luxury, the top of the line entity that this Rolls Royce is representing, you, or femininity is, imagine just letting just anybody go in it, fling the doors open the trunk, you know, take a peek of inside of it. Now this Rolls Royce loses its value. When people see that, if someone starts to see that this Rolls Royce is just out in the open, some people will still be respectful, like, oh my god, that's a really expensive car, I better not mishandle it, otherwise I'm gonna have to pay for it. Someone who's ignorant, who doesn't even know the value of the Rolls Royce, won't care. They don't know, so they'll just open it, break the handles. They won't have any care or regard. Why? Because there aren't any boundaries to keep those type of people away from the Rolls Royce to begin with. So that relates to your femininity. If you don't have stanchions around yourself, your body, your heart, of course, don't go be guarded. Enjoy life, date, have friendships, have professional relationships. But if you do not have boundaries and limits as to how much access people who haven't invested enough, how much access those people have to you, you are literally wasting your femininity. You are just having your femininity out there with no stanchions, no security, nothing to protect you. And almost, I guarantee you, almost every time, only the worst things may come as a result of that. Please excuse me. So if you are truly a feminine being, a feminine woman, then you will have enough self-respect and self-control to respect your own boundaries and be only around people who respect your boundaries as well. If you are truly a feminine woman, you will also abstain from activities that are not conducive to your peace, that are not conducive to your safety, especially as a feminine woman, you see. And so that was point number 1 on how to ensure and thrive as a feminine woman and have self-maturity, self-care, self-guidance, and so on and forth. The first thing is having the proper boundaries. You are no longer a girl. You are no longer a girly girl. You are now a feminine woman. You are now a feminine being. And so as a feminine being, you now have full guardianship over yourself instead of being a little girl who's looked after, okay? So it is your duty, your choice to protect yourself by using boundaries, wisdom, and any other measures that you see fit, and still having fun and enjoying yourself as well. And I would like to just throw one small thing in there. I would say if you are in a relationship or you're married, that person does not have sovereignty over you. Okay, that person might guide you because now you are a unit, but your husband doesn't have that kind of power over you. You still, as a feminine woman, have full control, governance, and sovereignty over yourself, okay? Whether or not you are married or not, it's just as a feminine being now you've decided to share that platform with someone you trust and decided to honor in the eyes of God as a husband, as a couple, okay? So that leads me to point number 2. Point number 2 is have an understanding or definition of what femininity means to you. Femininity can mean a number of things, okay? Femininity, again, back to the first point, back to the initial part of the video, femininity doesn't only mean liking pink things, liking girly things, getting your hair done or your nails done or wearing bows and so on and forth. That is being girly, okay? So when you upgrade from being girly and now you are a feminine woman, you have to understand what femininity is. How can you embody femininity if you don't understand what it is? It's almost impossible, right? That would be like someone coming up to you and say, hey, go do that. And you're like, go do what? And they're like, I don't know, that. You're going to be like, well, what is that? You know? So that's the same thing that goes with femininity. If you don't understand what femininity is, someone might come to you and say, a feminine woman cooks and cleans for me every day, gets her nails done, gives me her body without marriage, and is just soft-spoken, lets me take advantage of her and do whatever I want, because that is a feminine woman. And guess what? You're gonna do and follow exactly what they said, because you yourself haven't given yourself a definition of what femininity is. But when you've given yourself a definition of what femininity is, someone can't come into your life, into your house and say, hey, this is my idea of femininity. If you're not feminine, that if you don't do this, that means you're not feminine. You're just going to be like, oh, well, it doesn't seem like we have the same morals and values or ideology as it comes to femininity. So let's just part ways amicably. I send you off with love. Very simple. But you can't even do something as simple as that if you don't understand what the definition of femininity is or means to you. So cultivate what that means to you. That is one of the first things that you must do as a girly girl who's entering maturity, entering femininity, or as just a woman who is tapping more into her femininity and trying to understand what exactly that entails and means for her. So I also wrote here, to some women, femininity means that they prioritize their peace, their safety, and their overall enjoyment in life. That's one of the things that it means to me. For me, femininity means peace above all things. Peace and peace and peace. And femininity also means respect, respect for myself, and respect for humanity. For me, okay, when I'm feeling my least feminine, oftentimes I am not at peace, I am not safe, and I am not respecting either myself or humanity. But femininity can mean a number of things for different people that could be ranging off, for example, having a polished appearance. So your hair, your nails, your physical appearance, your weight, the clothes you wear, how tailored they are to your body, the length of them, and so on and forth, okay? And it's really also important not to confuse femininity and modesty, because modesty, again, there is a scale. They're both on a scale, right? There's a spectrum. You can be very feminine or not very feminine. You can be extremely modest or not so modest. Okay, it all also depends on your culture. For example, if your culture means being modest means to not show, your shoulder or your knee, and someone could be feminine and say, well, I have long sleeve on, for example. It's okay that I can bare my shoulders a bit. It's okay that my dress is knee length, but I still find myself feminine. So no one can fully give you a definition. You have to understand where to find that proper balance between being feminine or even extending it to being modest, okay? But again, there is respect in there. So a true feminine woman, for me, my idea of being feminine is having respect for myself. Do I have respect for myself if I'm bearing it all to the world, to within the extent of what bearing it all means to me, to my religion, or to the way I was brought up, and so on and forth? So you get to pick. All right, or your society, your environment kind of taps into you picking, but at the end of the day, the decision is still yours. So again, femininity might mean a range or a number of things as far as appearance, your hair, your nails, your clothing, your size, and so on and forth. Okay, it could also mean having a polished financial life. So what I mean by that is having savings, having investments, having good credit, having, passive income, having a certain amount of income, having a career, and so on and forth. Okay, a way to continuously have a safe livelihood. Another way of what femininity could mean is having a stable household and family. Okay, and when I say household, I don't only mean like your children or your husband. I mean household as the relationships that you have in your life. What kind of friendships do you have? What is your tribe or your community? What are they like? For example, your relationship with your siblings, your parents, your loved ones, a positive marital relationship, and the list goes on. Either way though, you get to decide what femininity means to you and how you can go on about maintaining it, increasing it, or upgrading it. Okay, you get to decide. The decision is yours. Okay, so one final thing that I wrote here is usually a parent likes to strive for or achieve having children who are safe, successful, and happy, right? So for a feminine woman who now has guardianship over herself, your goal should also be to strive for being safe, successful, and happy. Okay, safety can mean whatever it is, as long as you are comfortable with your meaning of it. And also success could be or mean anything as long as you are okay with the results of it. And that as well also goes with happiness. Okay, what means happiness to you might not mean happiness to her, him, or they. But what is it? When you have full sovereignty and full guardianship of yourself, who cares what it means to them? Okay, the only important matter at hand is, what does it mean to you? And it is also impossible to be feminine if you don't understand what it is, because different people will pull you into different directions in trying to convince you of what it is for their benefit, you see. And so when you're doing something that's beneficial to other people, chances are it might not also be beneficial fully to you. So as a feminine woman, it is important to have the wisdom and discernment to go and do what is fully beneficial for you. What fully keeps you safe. So I'll give you an example. Early on into my adulthood, I decided or even into like in my late teens, okay? I sat down and decided and tried to understand what femininity meant to me. Of course, that vision, those ideas have grown, they've evolved, and so on and forth. But I knew from an early on that I wanted to be feminine, and I wanted to understand what it meant, okay? Whether for me or through society, but I just wanted to understand first. I don't like to do things that I didn't understand. So anyway, I sat down and really pondered on the idea of what femininity meant overall. And so for me, I've actually reached the conclusion that femininity meant that I was comfortable, safe, and at peace. Of course, these things evolve during different chapters of my life, but they don't really evolve too far away from their core. After I've concluded what femininity meant to me and that it meant being comfortable, safe, and at peace, I started to move accordingly. So I started to also dismiss and remove things quickly that were jeopardizing my comfort, my peace, and my safety. Why? Because I sat down early on and tried to understand what femininity meant to me. And so once I understood that, well, anything that jeopardizes it is not good for me. Not a friendship, not a relationship, not a professional relationship, not a job, not a lifestyle, not a habit. Nothing that jeopardized my comfort, peace, and safety was good for me. Because why? It jeopardized my femininity. And when I'm not safe and dwelling and resting in my femininity, I just don't like where my life usually goes. So again, you don't have to follow this to the T, but you do have to sit down and think for yourself and ponder on the idea of what does it mean to you. Okay, I always say here with the Feminine Takeoff, it's always about choosing you. This channel is not a channel like a classroom channel or a teaching channel. This channel really is about your version of self-improvement and seeing me as an example among many examples that you might find either useful or useless to either regard or disregard. It could really just be that simple. Okay, so again, anything that jeopardizes my comfort, my peace, and my safety just has to go. We don't do that over here, okay? Even if it's drinking. That's actually why I stopped drinking a little under 2 years ago. I woke up one day and I was like, do I want to wake up and feeling a hungover, not feeling my optimum version of myself? And I said, no. Is it feminine for me to like wake up with a headache all the time, having to take a medicine, or just not feeling like my best healthy self and gaining sugar weight from drinking wine and so on and forth? No, not necessarily. So what did I do? I just stopped it. I just reduced it. I started reducing it until I could stop it. Now it's really hard to see me have a glass of wine unless it's truly a fine wine. And when I say fine wine, I don't mean a couple hundreds or 1,000 or two. I mean true quality wine. Okay, that's when I'm like, okay, let's see. But even then, it takes a lot out of me. Again, or anything, even if it's keeping certain friendships or even talking on the phone for a certain hours of time. You know, I always think, is this conducive to me? Is this keeping me comfortable, safe, and at peace? And if those questions aren't answered properly the way they should be, I said, you know what? We don't do that over here. In the Feminine Takeoff world, in the Krista world, that's not existent. So find a world of which you have the best version of yourself, and anything that you interact with, you ask, is this good for my world? And if the answer is no, move accordingly. Okay? Again, we can all be girly, but to be feminine requires maturity, boundaries, okay, wisdom, attunement, and so on and forth. You need to be able to listen to yourself, listen to your inner voice, your inner being, heal yourself in order to truly be feminine and thrive. And I wish all of that upon you, Feminine Takeoff ladies. I wish, including myself, I wish for us to thrive in our femininity, not just be girly and be polished on the outside, but also to be feminine and to glow and radiate within and from within to the outside. I think a lot of times, even as adults, I've confused this myself, thinking, oh my God, I'm so girly. I do like pink things. I do like to move softly and gently, so I must be feminine. But that might not always necessarily be true. You are feminine when you have full sovereignty over yourself and you understand through deciding what femininity means to you and having boundaries for that femininity that you've now decided and also defined. Okay, that'll be all for today. Thank you so much for taking time to watch my channel. I appreciate your views. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your subscriptions. It makes me so happy each time I get a subscribe, even if it's one every day. It makes me so happy and I feel so grateful. Please continue to like, subscribe, comment, and even share my content. It means a lot to me, and it also helps me out a lot. Let's take off to better ourselves. Let's take off to improve ourselves and to have fun and to enjoy everything that life has to offer us feminine women. Thank you so much. Mwah. Oh, by the way, this is how the flowers came out. What do you guys think? I'm just gonna keep it somewhere in my hotel room or even in the bathroom and just enjoy it. So that's one more pretty thing I get to look at when I wake up. Anyway, thank you all again for your time and your energy. Mwah.